Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to talk about the lipless crankbait and why this is probably the best fall bass fishing lure of all time. Absolutely love fishing lipless crankbait throughout the fall. It catches a ton of fish because those fish are always chasing bait fish, and we're going to talk about that in today's video, why I like to use this, how I choose my baits more importantly, where these work, and ultimately your rod and reel selection to make sure you're catching the most amount of fish you can on a lipless crankbait. So stay tuned and let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, where does a lipless crankbait work and where do you need to be throwing it throughout the fall? And the answer is pretty much everywhere. I will throw a lipless crankbait on just about everything throughout the fall. My favorite ways to fish it are through grass, especially if you fish ponds or even on lakes. You'll have the grass start to die off. There'll be a few places left that grass will still be alive. You can rip a bait through it, and the lipless crankbait is an excellent way to do that. I'll cover a ton of grass fishing lakes with a lipless crankbait. The other place that I really like to fish a lipless crankbait is going to be to cover those windy points, those rocky banks, anything like that. A lipless crankbait comes through rocks excellent if you choose the right one, and we'll talk about that here shortly. But I just absolutely love to cover water with a lipless crankbait. Even though this bait has always been known as a grass fishing bait, and it seems that's the only place that this ever really works, I've caught a ton of fish just covering rocky gravel banks, anything like that. You'll cover a ton of water and be able to catch fish. It'll work pretty much anywhere another crankbait will work. The only place I really do not throw a lipless crankbait is around wood. I'd rather throw a square bill in that situation. But if those fish are on rocky banks or they're in the grass, I will absolutely have a lipless crankbait in my hand, and I'll be covering a ton of water throwing these guys right here. So more importantly, let's talk about the lure selection, how you need to choose the correct one to make sure you're fishing it properly and covering those different types of cover, because one lipless crankbait will not do it all. So when it comes to choosing a lipless crankbait, there are three things that I take a look at when I'm picking my bait. The first one is going to be the body shape. The second one is going to be the color, and then the last one that I play with is going to be the actual sound of your lipless crankbait. So I own a ton of different crankbaits, all different types of body shapes, sounds, and colors, and we're going to go over which ones work best when. So the number one thing you need to pay attention to when your body shape is it a very bulky body? And head, more importantly, is the biggest one. So on this guy right here, has a very fat head, but overall the rest of the body is very narrow the entire way through. This is kind of an all-purpose lipless crankbait to me. I absolutely love, these are the 6th Sense Snatch and the Booyah Hard Knockers. Those are the two that I like the most for this. This is going to be, if you don't know which one to do, which one to throw, these are the types that I'm going to use. They're going to have that fatter head, but they're going to be very narrow. A red-eye shad is another excellent example of this guy right here. And what this will do is that fat head will still deflect on rocks as you're dragging it through rocks. You won't get hung up as much. But since it's very flat, it will come through the grass well as well. It's not the best at either one, but it will work very well on each one, so that you only need one lipless crankbait. That being said, some will work better than others on those different types of cover, so that is why I use this as like an all-purpose, usually my starting point, and then once I figure out what type of cover those fish are on, I'll pick one of these other ones. While we're on that subject, let's go ahead and talk about sound here. Since we have two almost identical crankbaits right here. This guy is the 6th Sense Snatch, and this guy is the Booyah One Knocker right here. So when it comes to sound, it's my last pick that I usually focus on whenever I'm fishing a lipless crankbait, because sometimes it really doesn't matter. But I've also seen where it does matter. Some things will do different things to the fish. If everyone's out there throwing a lipless crankbait that sounds like that and is very loud, sometimes you can come in with the One Knocker and have that very quiet sound and end up catching some fish with it, or getting more bites than other people. Usually, if they're eating a lipless crankbait, most lipless crankbaits come exact same body shape in a hard knocking and then a silent or one knocking sound. I'll just tie both on. And I'll fish an area with the hard knocking one. They can find this one a little bit easier. If I get some bites on it and they stop biting, I'll throw this one in there and see if I can get some other bites. I'll usually alternate them in together just because the sound sometimes can make a difference, but not always as much as color or body shape will. The other thing that I've found with these one knocking crankbaits, I don't know why, but they tend to catch bigger fish. You might not catch as many. Like I've caught tons and tons of fish on a rattling one, and it just absolutely catches a ton of fish, especially in ponds. They find it all the time. For some reason, the one knocking one will catch the biggest fish out of the school. I've literally fished places in Florida. I'll take 5 casts with this guy and catch 5 12-inchers. I'll pick up the one knocker, throw it in there, and catch a 5-pounder. I have no idea why that's the case. It could have just been a fluke that I happened to put it in front of the bigger one with this guy, but I've noticed that sometimes the bigger ones will eat this lower sound crankbait. So now there are 2 other body shapes that work really well for different types of cover. If you're fishing in grass, you have to have something like these guys right here. This is the Duke from Sixth Sense, and then this guy is the Lucky Craft. I think this is the D7. I don't even know if they make this anymore, but it's a very good example of what I'm talking about for the body shape. You want something that is extremely narrow. This is the thinnest lipless crankbait that I own. It's like super narrow. It has that very fat body this way, but it is super narrow across the back. Same with this Duke right here. It is a very narrow crankbait. It's very short, but it's fat this way, and then it has that very narrow appearance along the back. That narrow appearance allows it to cut through the grass really, really well. It's gonna come through the grass, gonna not get snagged as much. It might not come through rock as much. Something like this, if you're reeling it and it comes up against a piece of rock, it might get wedged in there and not even get the hook snagged. Sometimes you can get that back out, but it might not be the best rock crankbait. But if you're fishing grass, you have to have that super narrow profile because that's what's going to come through the grass the best. And the last body shape that you have to have, this is going to be my rock crankbait. I fish it more around those gravel banks, those rocky points. It's going to be something like the old Bill Lewis rattle trap, or this is the Sixth Sense Quake right here. And what these two have is a very fat profile. They're not as tall because the rest of the mass is going widthwise, and that width allows it to come through rocks better. It has a very fat nose on both of these. And you can see on this rattle trap right here, the nose is starting to wear off because I've been banging it into the rocks, which protects the hooks from getting snagged, and it'll actually deflect like a square bill crankbait will. It won't deflect as well, but it does deflect and not get hung up as much. But those wear marks only go back to about the line tie there because it is deflecting just off the nose in the rocks, and that's what they're designed to do. So the very fat profile appearance is what you're looking for on these types of crankbaits because they will deflect out of the rocks better and fish better in those types of areas. So I like to have all 3 styles of these crankbaits, and like I said, sound makes a difference sometimes, but not as much. But each of these have their own sound too, just between each crankbait. So even you could try a Bill Lewis rattle trap and catch them, and then they might stop biting that, and you throw the Quake in there, and this one has a hard knocking and some BBs, where this one's just BBs and they have a different sound, so they might get different amounts of bites just in that alone. And the last thing is your color. I keep it really simple on color, especially in the fall. I'm gonna throw something shad patterned or chrome. That's pretty much all I fish. That's what they like this time of year. They're gonna be chasing shad, chasing bait fish. So I'm going to focus heavily on those shad patterns. However, there are times where a crawfish pattern will catch them, mostly in the spring, but sometimes in the fall. If that water's dirty, or you know that those fish really feed on crawfish, especially, like I said, this is my rock crankbait, those crawfish like to live around those rocks, so a crawfish pattern might work well in the fall as well. More often than not, I'm gonna go with the shad pattern. And then the last color that you have to have, especially on cloudy days or a little bit dirtier water, is some type of gold. The silvers work great, the shad patterns work great, but a gold is an awesome choice, especially if you fish in lakes that have golden shiners, Florida, places like that, or you just have some dirtier water or some cloudier days. This is going to throw a little bit more flash than that chrome will on those cloudy days. And the last thing we're going to touch on is our rod and reel setup. I keep it really simple with a lipless crankbait. You can use glass rods, you can use different lipless crankbait rods that are 7'4" and such and get you more leverage. For the most part, 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to use this setup right here. This is a 7-foot, medium heavy, fast action. That's it. It's the most basic rod that you can use in bass fishing. It works very well for lipless crankbaits. It has enough backbone to snatch it out of the grass. That fast tip has enough to be able to get those fish hooked, and I'll use the reel more than the rod to make sure those fish don't come off. I'll play them very slowly and oftentimes I don't have fish coming off. I will try some other lipless crankbait setups. If those fish are coming off, you can go to a glass rod, but usually I'm ripping this crankbait out of the grass, and I need that stouter backbone to actually pull this crankbait through the grass, and I'll take losing a couple fish here and there if that's the difference between a glass rod and a regular rod, because I'll get more bites by being able to rip this out of the grass better. I do use a 7:1 or whatever 7 something gear ratio reel. That is just my go-to there. I'd rather have a faster reel that I can slow down than having to reel fast with a slower reel to keep it above the grass. And then lastly, I go with 15 to 17 pound fluorocarbon. I prefer 15, but if I can go up to 17, if I need that extra lift in the bait to keep it above the grass, or I'm fishing around some bigger fish and heavier cover, hydrilla, stuff like that, I might go with the 17 pound test, but 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to go with straight 15 pound fluorocarbon. So if you enjoyed today's video and you want to see some other fall bass fishing baits that'll have you catching fish all fall long, go ahead and check this video out right here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss any more of my fishing videos coming up, and leave a like if you enjoyed today's video. Thanks for watching.